everybody so much for joining us today. First, let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past and present. It's a great pleasure to have Ursula Fuentes for the first time here in these premises. Thank you, Ursula. I think we met somewhere in year 2000 in the international climate negotiations, and Ursula was the powerhouse in the German negotiation team, and then recently was also the person with lead responsibility in the Ministry of Environment in Germany for the Climate Action Plan, which was Germany's long-term plan for climate mitigation involving all sectors, all states, etc. And it was a major exercise that then passed in November 2016 in the German Parliament. So there is a lot of knowledge here from the from German climate and energy policy over here. Ursula is now with Climate Analytics in Perth, and also is an associate adjunct professor with Murdoch University. And we are very lucky also to have her as part of our Energy Transition Hub exercise. They are providing the Western Australian node of it. Without further ado, thank you so much for coming, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Malte, and thanks for this nice introduction and for inviting me to present here. Indeed, this is the first time I come to your new office. Last time I was here, it was still in the other one, but it sort of feels familiar and almost at home because we had some of these virtual conferences of the Energy Transition Hub. So I've seen this space small on my screen in Perth. That's great to be here. And great to be here again. Actually, also last time I was here, that's a bit more than a year ago, I did speak about the climate action plan, a lot also about the process, how it was developed. So for those who were at that presentation, I guess this is also a sort of an update in terms of where we are in Germany with climate policy. But indeed, meanwhile, I have joined Climate Analytics. So I'm presenting work also based, part of it is based of what Climate Analytics is doing as one of the partners of the Climate Action Tracker. So Climate Analytics is an international climate think tank institute with headquarters in Berlin, but with offices in some other parts of the world, in Lomé, in New York, and now also in Perth, which is where I'm based. And the Climate Action Tracker is formed by 3 partners. So this is Climate Analytics and 2 other institutes, also based in Germany. This is EcoFIS and New Climate. And that is a project that Climate Analytics and these partners have started to track climate action, both based on what countries are doing and their pledges or commitments, but also in terms of their policies and how that relates to what we need to achieve. So what I'm structuring this along 3 parts, and always following the 3 questions, which are the questions underlying the Talanoa dialogue. Because actually I'm invited to come here in the context of the EU Climate Diplomacy Week, which goes under the banner or the theme of the Talanoa dialogue, which is the Fijian term for what used to be called the facilitative dialogue that was established with the Paris Agreement, so with the decision on the Paris Agreement, to have a discussion within the member states of the Paris Agreement about the mitigation part, about how to achieve the Paris Agreement goal. So these are the questions that structure that debate that started at the last climate conference in Bonn, which was under the Fiji presidency, and will end up with the political part at the next climate conference in Katowice at the end of this year, and will also be informed by the release of the IPCC special report on the Paris Agreement temperature goal. So I give a little bit of an overview, although I'm sure many of you are aware of this as well, in terms of the global situation, and then go into the EU, the climate policy in the EU, because the German climate policy is really embedded in the EU climate policy. So when we look at the question where we are in terms of the climate and Paris Agreement, the important answer is that we have a gap between what countries have pledged to do, and even more so what countries' current policies are leading to in terms of emissions, compared to the pathways that would be consistent, even with the 2-degree limit that was always discussed and also agreed before Paris, and even more so looking at the temperature goal that was then decided with the Paris Agreement, which is keeping global warming well below 2 degrees and pursuing efforts to achieve the 1.5 limit. This kind of analysis has been regularly updated by the Climate Action Tracker and has also been fed into assessments on this gap that UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, also publishes based on this and other analysis of similar nature. And the fact that we have a gap between what countries are doing and the 2-degree target was already recognized in the decision for the Paris Agreement. So that analysis was already available, but it still holds. And that then translates also into the warming pathway that the current pledges that have been put forward by countries mostly before Paris as intended national contributions, but then were transformed into the commitments under the Paris Agreement, the nationally determined contributions, where it's clear that the goal, the temperature goal, is not going to be achieved without additional policies beyond those currently implemented, but also beyond those that have been committed. So where we need to go, the goal that we're talking about, and it's important to highlight that I'm focusing here just on the mitigation part, which is also the focus of the Talanoa dialogue. Of course, the Paris Agreement is not just about mitigation, it's also about adaptation goals, and it's also about the issue of financing this in developing countries. So I'm focusing here on the mitigation side, and that is also the focus of this Talanoa dialogue. So the Paris Agreement temperature goal, I'm sure well known here as well, and that also translates also in the Paris Agreement in the Article 4 into a goal on the pathway. I'm sure also well known, and yeah, Malte and others have also done a lot of analysis around these issues. So this is what we have to achieve, and to this was enshrined in the Paris Agreement, which then entered into force at record speed because it was ratified by so many countries so fast, of course also by the EU, and of course also by Australia. Yeah, and this is just to illustrate, and again, there is a lot of analysis here, but this is to illustrate more schematically what does it mean in terms of policies and in terms of pathways, based on sort of the previous generation of pathways and scenarios that have been undertaken, which now can be updated based on a wide range of new scenarios that have been developed and published in time for this IPCC assessment, which basically confirm the basic features of what needs to happen, which is that we need to peak global greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, and move CO2 emissions towards zero earlier than achieving the net zero target for all greenhouse gases, and also the need for deploying negative emissions, because we have already emitted too much because of that accumulation, to then get to the net zero for all greenhouse gases, which is also explicitly worded in the Paris Agreement. With the Climate Action Tracker, there has also been done analysis based on these pathways. What does it mean for the short term, which has also been published in Climate Policy, I believe, last year. So outlining some of the benchmarks that one can work out at the global scale for all sectors. Because that is what is important, that it needs to be decisive action in all sectors. Of course, the decarbonization of the power sector, including an increased share of renewable energy, is an important part, but then also electrification of transport and buildings, to also move the transport and the building sector into zero emissions. The industrial sector, both energy efficiency as well as innovations for process-based emissions, but then also agriculture and deforestation, and tackling some of the sectors where there are less technological options, but also many emerging, like aviation and shipping. I will now focus on the issue of the decarbonization of the power sector, because that is the one that is, I guess, the one where there's a lot of consensus among all the analysis. Even, you know, there can be a lot of variation in terms of options, but decarbonizing the power sector early on, and then through a decarbonized power sector and through an electrification, decarbonizing other sectors, is a very robust finding in terms of what is needed. So what the Climate Action Tracker also does, and is regularly updating, so it also does a rating of countries based on an analysis of the literature and methodologies of equity. I won't go into the details of that, but what Climate Action Tracker is also doing, and increasingly doing, is analyzing the policies in a range of countries. At present, it's 32 countries, and looking how these policies are improving in all the sectors, also compared to these benchmarks that they have developed. And with the last update, so after we're regularly reviewing these policy assessments, and then doing like a cross check across what are the features that we are recognizing, like trends that we've been recognizing lately. That's also published as briefing papers by the Climate Action Tracker. You can find that on the website. an important feature that we are identifying, and that relates, I think, to another important element of, or I guess also answer to the question, where are we now? So we, on one hand, we have a gap, but on the other hand, we are also living in the middle of a real technological revolution in terms of technology developments for renewable energy and storage. And that's something that, there are lots of examples also here in Australia, but also in other places of the world where renewable prices or cost for renewable energy is dropping dramatically, also renewable energy with storage in some parts of the world. And Australia is one of these lucky places in terms of the resources. Costs are really, these technologies are outcompeting fossil fuel technologies. So, and that is leading to the trend that renewable energy is developing so fast and being uptaken in some countries so fast that for some of the countries we had to revise the projections downwards, so positively, less emissions. For example, in Chile, but also in the US, where we have a policy that is at the federal level explicitly not supporting this development, or explicitly trying to support coal, but still what is happening on the ground, and that is largely determined also by the economic development, is leading to an improvement. And that together with that, also some positive policy signals also at the international level. So in terms of collaboration of countries, one example is the Powering Past Coal Alliance that was started last year by the UK and Canada, with a range of countries joining, agreeing on the need to phase out coal as one of the important steps to decarbonize the power sector. Also in the marine transport area, I think quite an important breakthrough with the IMO agreeing also on a target in line with the Paris Agreement. So that's starting the discussion and hopefully will lead also to more transformation in that sector. And then some countries, so one of them is New Zealand, announcing new targets also for the long term. On the other hand, there are also challenges when we look at the latest development, and in terms of looking at the decarbonization of the power sector, a worrying trend is that some governments are still continuing not only with the existing coal, but even with expansion of thermal coal. So this is among the countries that the Climate Action Tracker is analyzing. It's Japan, Indonesia, Turkey, and as part of the EU, Poland. And although the Climate Action Tracker doesn't analyze the member states in all details, but when analyzing the policies in the European Union, it's also important to consider policies at the member state level. But then on the positive side, there are some governments that have recently decided to phase out coal, at least in principle, but haven't really implemented it or haven't really decided on the exact pathway. This is South Korea, Chile, and Germany also, and I will get to the German discussion soon. And then there are some governments that are supporting explicitly coal at the federal level. Oh, and here's Australia and the US. Yeah, of course, another very important, and of course China is part of those countries that we're looking at, and an important question when we discuss at the global level is of course always the role of China, because of just the overwhelming share of their emissions, and also the questions, are emissions already showing signs of peaking or not? And we have seen a rise in emissions again, also in particular in China. So we can't really say at this stage whether we are heading towards a peak or not. And that has a lot to do also with the question of how much expansion of coal we have to take into account. So decarbonization, the next issue I will focus on is that issue of the role of coal. Also because that is an important element of the German discussion. I will get to later. And what I'm showing here, this is some part of the analysis that climate analytics has been doing on the issue of looking at what does the Paris Agreement and what are pathways that are consistent with the Paris Agreement, what do they imply for the use of coal, comparing that to the existing capacity in coal and looking at average or typical lifetime of coal. That's how you can establish the assessment of emissions, but also doing this not only for the existing capacity, but also planned and announced capacity, which is of course something that is changing, because some positive signs is that some of the plans are already being revised because of the different economics. This is from a report from 2016 based on one of the pathways, or actually two of the pathways, one with the old 2-degree goal and the other one with the Paris Agreement goal. But the important message is that even if we just take into account the current coal capacity, and if we assume that they run for a typical lifetime, which is typically like 40 years, the emissions would be too high to be consistent with the Paris Agreement. And it would need to be phased out by 2050, the latest, which is also, if you look at the IEA scenario, the IEA technology scenario, that is sort of in line with below 2 degrees, it shows even a phase out date of nearly around 2040. But it also shows that it's not just about no new coal, it's really also about reducing the use of existing capacity or taking existing capacity out of the market, which is of course a different challenge than just saying, well, there will not be any investment into new coal. And maybe this is actually, I've gone through this, so. And just also briefly, what is happening and is also expected to happen is that we have a transition from coal to gas, which implies an increase in gas, which is of course also very relevant for a country like Australia that is a key exporter of gas. But it's also important to take into account that that's another fossil fuel that would then also at a later stage need to be phased out. So that's coming also from an analysis of the Climate Action Tracker, looking at the role of gas in the power sector globally and in some key countries. And if one takes into account that many of these scenarios imply also use of gas with CCS, which is something that in the current economic dynamic doesn't seem to be competitive with renewable energy, that would even imply less gas or an earlier transition also away from natural gas in the power sector. Okay, so now I'm coming to the European Union, and I'm also trying to follow the range of questions. Where are we? Where do we need to go, and how do we get there? The European Union, this is just to illustrate that in the European Union, the emissions have been decreasing with increase of growth. So there is a decoupling. The question is that emissions growth fast enough, or does it need to be accelerated? And what the European Union, where it stands in terms of policies, the European Union has a framework of targets that is based on 3 pillars. It's a greenhouse gas emission reduction target, a renewable energy target, and an energy efficiency target. So that's the framework that the European Union has been having for quite a while, also before Paris, and focus on 2020. And part of this, of the European Union contribution to Paris, so the NDC, the national contribution, is a similar package for 2030. And the European Union is in the middle of a discussion both on implementing these targets with a broad range of legislation, but at the same time, while discussing the implementation of these targets, there is a discussion already going on about the need to update these targets. That is a very intensive discussion that is literally just going on. So there's a crucial meeting of the energy ministers. It's called the Energy Council of the European Union. It started on Monday and is finishing today. So they're not discussing as we speak, I guess, because they're probably asleep, but one would, and one is already hearing some of the news there. Yeah, these are some of the details of that discussion that is going on in the European Union, which is quite a complex process between the institutions, the Parliament and the Council, with the governments represented, and they have to agree on a common position before it then is legislated into the European law. So that's what is outlined here is the different starting positions. The starting position what was adopted in 2014 and then agreed with the NDC, and how the discussion is evolving, which is clearly moving in the direction of enhanced targets in terms of energy efficiency and the renewable energy share, which then implies, although there is no formal discussion yet about that, but it does then also imply the enhancement of the overall greenhouse gas emission reduction target, which at this stage is at least 40% compared to 1990. Because the underlying analysis behind these targets takes these into account in terms of how consistent this is with the greenhouse gas reduction target. So if we assume that an agreement will be reached for a 33% renewable share and 33% for energy efficiency, this would be roughly consistent with a 46% reduction target. There has been a proposition by one member state, the Netherlands, that has proposed increasing the reduction target even to 55% reduction, so from 40 to 55. But again, that's not yet a formal discussion that's ongoing, because this is about the implementation of this energy package. Yeah, but I guess what I would like to highlight at this stage is what is driving this discussion in the European Union is, on the one hand, the knowledge that the Paris Agreement demands an enhancement of targets based on the analysis that we have a gap, and that's how we started in Paris, so everybody has to upgrade it, and that there's a time cycle for this. The first one, and this is why we have this Talanoa dialogue that would lead to countries then also informed by the IPCC report enhancing their, or updating, the language is updating their NDCs by 2020, which is also the timing for when countries are supposed to develop the long-term strategies, the latest. Some countries have already delivered them, like Germany, like Mexico, like the UK, and some are working on it. So that's the one element, but the other element is also that there is this dynamic going on, especially in terms of the renewable energy technologies, that is also leading to the recognition that the assessment of the costs and the impacts, so which underlines these policies and the setting of targets, has changed compared to when the targets were set, which was in 2014, but based on analysis that was basically from 2010 or 11. yeah, and I mentioned the long-term strategy that the Paris Agreement is asking every country to develop by 2020. The European Union already had a long-term target of a reduction of 80 to 95% in 2011. So that was based on analysis at the time in the IPCC and based on the old 2 degrees C target. And immediately after the Paris Agreement was agreed, there was a recognition that would have to be revised at some point. The EU linked that linked that to the IPCC report that's upcoming. So this is now the timing this year, and the European Union has therefore mandated the European Commission to develop a strategy or a roadmap document that updates the older analysis that underlied that target by the first quarter of 2019. So this is basically to get ready for a political decision on a strategy, and a draft will already be published this year, so before the COP, hoping that this will first help the discussion within the European Union, but also in other countries to do similar processes. Thank you. Good, and now I'm coming, and this is also still in under the header of where are we in the European Union. Besides these targets, one of the flagship instrument really of climate policy in the European Union for quite some time is the European trading system, the emissions trading system, which covers roughly half or a bit less than half of the emissions, basically the whole power sector and part of the industry sector, including also aviation recently. And that has, there has been a challenge for a long time that this instrument didn't work as an incentive for decarbonizing the power sector because the price was too low, the volume of allowances was too high. That was partly related to the financial and economic crisis, but also to the allowance of international permits at some stage. So there has been a very intensive debate and finally adoption of reform steps to ensure that this instrument is working again, so to reduce that over supply of allowances. And we are seeing a very encouraging and very strong signal of an increase in carbon price, which is now at roughly 15 euros. And that is a very different, that is already sending a very different signal to the power, to the electricity power market in terms of the feasibility and economic viability of coal. So, and the other part, of course, of that equation, decarbonizing the power sector, is increasing the share of renewable energy, where we have quite a wide range of in terms of the existing share of energy from renewable energy sources. It's important to understand that here the target is for the overall energy consumption. So this is not just for the power sector; it's also for other sectors. And where the share is highest, about a third on average in the European Union, is in the electricity sector, and lower in the heating and cooling sector, and much lower in the transport sector. And there is, what is shown here is the existing share in the member states compared to the targets that were defined for 2020. Where countries had individual targets and have a mandatory obligation to reach these targets. And those that are not on track would have to then basically pay for it. For 2030, there's an overall target, and the governance system of how to ensure that how that is reached is part of the package that is not yet decided. Right, so with these, I guess, two key instruments, increasing the share of renewable energy and in emissions trading, the question is, how is the emissions intensity developing in the electricity sector, and how is it projected? So we are seeing overall for the European Union about 36% reduction historically, and also projected then by until 2030, with a wide range, of course, according to the different situation in member states. So shown here, Germany quite high, still a lot of coal in the system, and France traditionally relying on nuclear energy, so therefore much lower. But the trend is similar, and certainly not fast enough to achieve what is needed. And here is what I showed before, but shown here for the European Union, so downscale to the level of the European Union, where the analysis of Paris Agreement consistent pathway shows that there needs to be a phase out by 2030 in the European Union, but also in the OECD countries in general. And also shows that it means a lot of discussion necessary about reducing the use of coal, or even phasing it out before the typical lifetime. And this analysis was also the basis for many, well, for the declaration of this Powering Coal Alliance, and for some of the targets that have been developed. Coal plays an important role in power generation in the European Union, but also quite not in all member states. Some of the plans are changing also with the changing environment, but clearly we have 2 countries in the European Union that have half of the coal capacity, which are Germany and Poland, which also shows how important the issue is in Germany. I need to speed up. So this illustrates the scenario that we've done, or the analysis of how a coal phase-out pathway would look like in the European Union, unit by unit, with different assumptions about optimization from regulatory or market perspective. I won't go into details here. You can see that also online. But the key story is that, yeah, no matter how you would optimize that, they have to disappear, and they disappear quite fast. And when we published this report, it was seen as something extremely daunting, like phasing out, especially for countries like Germany and Poland in such a short time, seems like an extremely daunting task. On the other hand, the situation that we have now, and this is shown here, is that we have an increasing number of countries that have actually decided a coal phase-out date. And these are all in line with that analysis that I've shown. And even if you look into the details, some of them are more ambitious than our analysis, like the Netherlands. The UK, an important example, and one of the leaders that is really like the country that has started an use of coal in the power sector traditionally, so has almost completely already moved out, or has long periods of time where it is where it's producing power without coal, and other countries following. Admittedly, some of them with not such a high share of coal, so then it is easier. But in the Netherlands, for example, there are many, or quite a few, very new coal-fired power plants. So phasing them out by 2030 with, and the government said, without any compensation. That is, I guess, yeah, also politically challenged. But there are also some local communities have decided phase-out dates, and also in the private sector space. So now I come to Germany. Where we are in Germany. I'll skip over this because I think that story has been told a lot, that Germany has been really a leader in developing renewable energy, especially in the power sector, with an amazing speed of 5-fold increase between 2000 and today, but still relying, even though renewable energy is the main power source, still relying a lot on coal, both hard coal and lignite. And lignite is the domestic source that in some regions is very important for the regional economy. on renewable energy, leading in terms of share in the electricity, but for heating and cooling and transport also still relatively low. Therefore, also the EU targets are still challenging for Germany, in particular for the non-electricity sector. But, and that's a big challenge, the greenhouse gas emissions in Germany have recently not been decreasing anymore. So they're roughly stable, going kind of up and down a bit. Last year went down a bit, but the year before up. And very importantly, it's not on track to achieve its 2020 target, which is it has decided way before the Paris Agreement, and which is more ambitious than the EU target, a 40% reduction by 2020. And it's already in the German, or I think also in the European media today, that there will be a new report released by the government, a new monitoring report that sees again that Germany is not on track. Even though Germany, and I did report about this also last year, has adopted an action program in 2013, that was at the beginning of the last government phase, where this gap was identified. So the need for additional measures was identified to close the gap and achieve this, going across all the sectors. And that was also the beginning of the identification of the need to phase out coal. But the political discussion wasn't quite ripe then. There was a lot of resistance. So that's why the discussion focused on many other sectors, but not explicitly on the need for phasing out coal. But with this yearly monitoring, we're now in the third year of this, and today it's in the German cabinet, a report drafted by the Environment Ministry, but then adopted by the whole cabinet, which will state that the reductions projected are only 32% and not 40%. So that's really a big gap. And that recognition was also at the heart of the development of the Climate Action Plan. That is the long-term strategy that Germany delivered after the Paris Agreement, and that introduced a strategy to achieve net greenhouse gas emissions through milestones and specific sectoral targets in 2030. So that was the impact of the Paris Agreement on the German policy, and that also recognized then for the first time that Germany needs to phase out coal, even though it didn't set a specific target. So that was again not possible to agree in government. But these sectoral targets are part of this plan and started the development of discussions and policies in each sector about what needs to be achieved. And the target for the energy sector that was agreed implied by what was discussed, something like halving coal between now and 2030. So if you compare that with phasing out coal by 2030, that is still far away from what would be a Paris Agreement consistent pathway. Now, where we are now, the existing debate in Germany now, the present German government, there was an election last year, but they only formed a coalition at the beginning of this year. They decided, and it's the same coalition like in the previous phase, and the important policy milestones or targets are set in a coalition agreement that is negotiated. And this coalition agreement confirms all the targets that have been set so far, including the action program and the climate action plan that was developed by the previous government. So the agreement is that all this will be implemented, including trying to close this gap for 2020 as soon as possible. And that had caused a lot of debate about whether Germany is giving up on the 2020 target. It actually was also one of the factors that led to a different coalition agreeing to form a government. which was a coalition of the Conservative Party with the Green Party and the Liberal Party, and that was one of the issues that that coalition or potential coalition couldn't agree on adopting measures, including on a phase out of coal, also on the short term, or starting the phase out to achieve this target. On the other hand, there's an agreement that the target for 2030, the sectoral targets will be legislated, so to really ensure a binding legislation to achieve these targets and develop policies, and to establish a commission that would look at the coal phase out. That's the so-called Coal Commission, although it's officially called Growth, Structural Change and Employment, which is to advise the German government in this year about the coal phase out. But parallel commissions will also be established for the building and the transport sectors, because the transport sector in particular is also a big challenge in Germany with emissions increasing. And an important element for the power sector is also the recognition that the renewable energy target will be enhanced to 65%, taking into account the need for the power sector to contribute to the decarbonization of transport and building. So the Coal Commission, that was established only last week. It took quite a while for the government to agree on it. The mandate, there was also a lot of discussion about who should sit in this commission. The idea is that it should represent a wide range of perspectives from research, industry, civil society, but also the regions that would be affected by transformation through this coal phase out. And these are in particular two regions that have relied traditionally on coal. And one of them, the Lausitz in the east, really almost solely, the whole economy is really based on coal mining and coal use. And the political agreement was that this commission will focus on how to manage such a transition and how to manage a structural change, including financing measures to ensure a transition in this region to other jobs. But it will also focus on what measures are necessary in the energy sector to reduce that 2020 gap, and to develop a plan for a stepwise reduction and a phase-out date for coal. So, yeah, maybe I'll leave it because we're running out of time here with the concluding slide, and then we can discuss the details. In terms of where we are with the European Union and Germany, there is a need for enhancing their target, as is for other countries, but that discussion is ongoing, in particular at the European Union level, and in connection also with the development of a long-term strategy. And the discussion about the need for coal phase-out is at the heart of this, but also the development of renewable energy and the long-term strategies, including more action on transport and building, which I haven't gone into the details here. So I'll leave it at this and hope we can discuss some questions.
Thank you so much, Ursula. We have options for questions now. We also have an audience online who also can ask questions. We also, who wants to start? Sam.
Thank you.
And please introduce yourself briefly with your full name and affiliation.
All right. Sam Johnston, I'm Senior Fellow at the Law Faculty here, and a few other things. But and thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I had two questions. The first was, is there a legal liability for missing the 2020 target in Germany? And if so, who would it fall on? And the other question I had is the jump in the carbon price under the ETS, you said sent a different policy signal, but I was wondering whether there was examples of where you had demonstrable changes in policy, in companies' behaviour that you could highlight, which are sort of attributable to that jump in the price?
So, first question: the target that I've shown here, the 2020 domestic target in Germany, is a voluntary target, so it doesn't have any legal implications. On the other hand, there's also a German part of the burden sharing within the European Union that covers the non-ETS sectors, the mostly transport and building, and that is related to the achievement of this target, even though this target is more ambitious than what Germany has committed to within the European package. But the problem that Germany has with increasing emissions in the transport sector in particular also leads to a challenge in achieving that part of the German target, which does have an implication in the sense that Germany would then have to buy units from other EU member states that are overachieving. And that's quite a different discussion to a few years ago where Germany was hoping to overachieve the target. But there we are. So that is part of the debate. So the other question, sorry.
Impact of the jump.
Oh,
in the
impact.
price.
I guess that's a bit too early to see now, but there has been some analysis published that looks at the impact of this price with another legislation that I haven't gone into, which is increasing the air pollution standards that power units will have to achieve by 2021. And the combination of these two factors, there's an analysis just published, I think, yesterday by Forbes, saying that this will really change the equation for many in terms of the decision. Do we? They would have to, in many cases, they would have to invest to achieve the 2021 air pollution target, or decommission this because it's not worthwhile looking at the long-term perspective. So I think we will see that over the next years, expecting this trend to continue.
I have here an online question from Robert McLean. Can you talk now? Unmute your microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Put you a bit louder.
Where does the Adani project fit into this equation?
Oh. Well, Germany imports, the hard coal in Germany is imported, but mostly not from Australia. Actually, the largest part comes from Colombia in the German case. So in that sense, looking at the German situation, maybe there's no direct link, but I think there's an important link if you look at these trends overall at the global scale. That there's a recognition that there's a move away, and a necessary move away from coal, and that of course has implications for the countries that are exporting coal. Actually, Climate Analytics has also just released a report about phase out of coal in Japan, and Japan does. Australia is the largest importer for Japan. And that discussion, of course, is also not really there in Japan at the government level, but will also have to start. And many of the investors and more investors are realizing that there's a move away, and are realizing the increased risk in keeping investing into this technology.
Thank you. Next question here.
Hi, Ursula. Thanks for that talk. I'm Michael Lord from Beyond Zero Emissions, a local climate change think tank. These policies, particularly the ETS, are imposing costs on European industry that rival industrial nations who aren't making as much effort on their industries don't have to pay those costs. Do you think there's a role for carbon tariffs on goods from outside the EU?
Actually, what the European Union has implemented to avoid these impacts, negative impact on competitiveness, is exemptions for energy-intensive industry that is exposed to international trade. So that's the instrument that or the mechanism that the European Union chooses to protect the industry that is affected. So that is always also part of the different steps of involvement in the emissions trading system. So that's why that is not being discussed. Obviously, that is something that can be discussed in the context of other important partners or countries not taking part in emissions reductions. Yeah.
Can I just add something, Ursula? Sorry, it's Caroline here. Yeah.
Yes.
It's totally true what you said. Just one mention: we have dormant in our ETS legislation a border mechanism, which is there, and we call it a tool in the toolbox that hopefully we won't have to use. But we have some member states that are arguing for us to use that tool that's in the toolbox, and in particular France, Italy, Romania. And we'll see where Spain will end up to, but there's a bit of a push to look at the possibility of using that tool. Oh, sorry, I work for the European Union in Canberra.
Thank you. The European Union is always in the background. Thank you for joining us. We have an online questions. There may be 4 questions. John.
Thank you, Ursula. John Wiseman from the Energy Transition Hub. A couple of questions about the ETS. Question 1, what are the assumptions or projections about the carbon price, say, over the next 10 years that are, that are informing, I guess, the discussions, say, in Germany or the EU? And perhaps a more answerable question, I mean, what do you see as the key policy settings that might continue to accelerate the carbon price and the rise in the impact of the ETS?
I can't really give you an answer to the first question. I don't know, Caroline, but I think that's a hard. Maybe Caroline can step into that.
What was the question? I missed that one. I wasn't.
The projection of the carbon price over the next 10 years.
And so these are done by independent analysis because we wouldn't give a price. Of course, it's a market mechanism. And so it's 20 by 2020, 30 by 2030. That's why I remember.
That's a good figure to remember. Thanks. And the key policies, I think it's the combination of the carbon price or the emissions trading system in the European Union, together with regulation on air pollution standards and the maybe it's 4 then really, so the regulation and policy decisions on phasing out coal, which is something that is implemented together with the carbon pricing to make sure that that transition is managed, and that's particularly important for countries that really need to manage a transition also in the regions and make sure that there is not a structural kind of disruption, but rather a managed structural change. And that, of course, combined with the continuing increase in the share of renewable energy, which is partly happening also for economic reasons, but also implies a policy setting in terms of market development, incentives also for storage, demand side management, and all that. So I think these elements combined.
Thank you. Some of you might have to leave because it's just sharp on time. We have 5 more questions as I counted. So if you have to leave now. No hard feelings. But we otherwise continue smoothly into the next 5 questions. Thank you for participating. Next question is over here.
Siegfried Ungerer, Senior Climate Change Advisor and Government Advisor. Look, I was going to ask a question concerning the EU, but that's probably better directed here. So I'll ask a question with regards to your transition policy. It looks very much like, and this is only an assumption, that your coal transition policy will involve more gas. Would that be correct?
You mean in the case of Germany?
In the case of Germany, yes.
Yes, that would that would certainly be correct, or partly, I guess that's part of the story, in particular in the short term. But I think another element is also that it will simply reduce the export of electricity, which is one of the reasons why emissions in Germany haven't been going down as fast as you would expect from the increase in renewable energy. They have been also going down in the energy sector, but not as fast. And one of the reasons is that the share of electricity that Germany is exporting, the net exports to neighboring countries, has been increasing because there was no incentive to not keep using coal in power stations because of the price situation, cheap coal and emissions trading not working. So increasing the renewable share just led to also an increase in so the expectation is partly transition to gas, but also partly reduction of this export. Yes.
How much agreement are you going to get, between the various EU partners? If you're looking at, I mean, we've got the same problem here in Australia. We desperately need to reform the market, and we can't get agreement, because of the states and because there's no energy policy at federal level. No, we're looking at 21 member states.
I can see that the EU can answer directly, which is a challenge.
Yes, we have a similar discussion in Europe on energy market design.
Yes.
So a set of directives to change the way the electricity and the gas market work. They are aimed, like Australia, to have affordable, secure, reliable, and sustainable energy. We have the same four, adjectives, qualificatives that are used, but we have a different way. We don't have. It's not the same as your neck. We do it differently, but we also have different conditions. We have a lot more interconnections, and so it means that the economics of storage versus the economics of new interconnections or demand-side management are different. But Ursula, you know that by heart, don't you?
Yeah. So that's part. There is a discussion at the EU level, and there's also discussion of the process at member state level. So, and in the course of the energy transition in Germany, we've already undergone I don't know how many reforms of the market in Germany. It was first very much focused on Germany, but it also realized very quickly that it had to also collaborate with neighboring partners, countries. So that's happening, and the latest reforms indeed have very much focused on, in terms of the market reform, enabling incentives for flexibility instruments like demand-side management, but also the grid expansion is another element of this. So it's not just the market; it's also the grid expansion and adaptation.
I think we have one key difference on capacity mechanisms.
Yes, that's another discussion.
Half of your neck is the reliability obligation. That would be similar to capacity mechanisms that we have in Europe. And we're trying to put a bit of order in the capacity mechanisms in Europe because they've been burgeoning everywhere. And they're often quite expensive for the consumer. And they're not taking into consideration the fact it could be cheaper to have a mechanism across border, for example. Yeah. And so we're setting new rules for these capacity mechanisms to make sure that they only are tackling the issue at stake. So, for example, if you only have a localized problem, you don't necessarily need to cover the whole market with a capacity mechanism. You just cover that localized area. If you have a problem only for a couple of days a year, it's again, maybe you need a strategic reserve rather than a capacity mechanism. So we issued guidelines as to what will work best with what your problem is, with the idea that we want the capacity itself to be as small as possible after taking into considerations what you can source from your neighboring countries, how you can cooperate to have a common system, etc., etc.
To have a least cost outcome, basically. Yeah. So Germany has introduced a strategic reserve and not a capacity mechanism. There was quite an intensive debate there. But yeah, there's also costly.
Capacity market is a subsidy. Demand management is also a subsidy if you look at it sort of closely.
Yes, it is. That's
The online viewers can't hear you without a microphone, but I would suggest we just.
I can subsidy. You're saying yes, it's a subsidy. One key difference, for example, in the European Union is that we're setting an emissions performance criteria. So there would be no subsidy to coal, for example, because we propose a 650 grams per megawatt hour, a limit to capacity that can be put under that mechanism and thus receive subsidy. Now, not all of our member states are happy with that proposed threshold. And so it's not yet legislated, but that's what we've tabled. Exactly.
Good guess.
We have one more question from Penny, but allow me now that I have both the EU and Germany on stage, that I inject one question, which is under the Paris Agreement, the increased NDCs can be put on the table, and the legal obligation is for those parties who have an NDC only until 2025. For others, they can or cannot. For 2025, we have the main party, the US, which is either by the time of when that discussion boils down, retracting from the Paris Agreement, or putting forward even a weakened one and argues that for some obscure legal reason that is also okay. So likely the impetus for submitting higher ambitious NDCs is very much lower. The EU, with these targets, as we can see here, would have an opportunity, even if slightly, to table a higher ambitious, more ambitious NDC. What is the likelihood of that?
Well, yeah, well, you can start. Or should I say?
Yeah, start. Gather my thoughts on what I can say.
Well, yeah, it's an important question. I think it's very important that that opportunity is taken for 2020, and that one doesn't wait for 2025. And indeed, the European Union has an opportunity. The European Union has traditionally been really leading in the international climate space, and because already the existing analysis shows that it would be, in terms of looking at the cost-effective pathway, it would be in the interest of the European Union to do so, and moving towards that in 2020 can enhance or support other countries to do so. So the question of likelihood, of course, well, we have all the member states have to agree, and certainly at this stage we don't have a consensus on that. Definitely, we have a number of countries that are pushing for more ambition. Led by the Netherlands, that is the country that really has said we have to move towards 55%. Other countries that are supporting higher ambition without naming a target yet. So that's the UK, that's France. Germany at some point has also been part of this, but I really wonder, because Germany is now struggling with its domestic issues. So I sort of think once others are there, maybe Germany comes on board, which is sort of unusual because often Germany is definitely part of this coalition. But we have interesting, and of course, on the other hand, we have Poland and the other Visegrad states that have been always fiercely opposing any further ambition. But I think there are things going on also in Poland, in terms of Poland has become now a net importer of electricity. So I think that discussion might be changing even in Poland in terms of the assessment of economic situation. Italy, with a new government, is also supportive of ambition. And Spain, also very recently with a new government, has completely switched position, and that's quite a large member state. So that's changing. So the dynamic is changing. So I would say it's definitely possible, but it's also depending on the EU to become part of this with the other. UK, France, I didn't mention France, of course, very important, also supportive.
Thank Thank you, Ursula. The thing is, our strategy is in a state of flux. We have two new governments in 2 member states that are very pro, more ambition. So it changes a little bit the balance of our member states. So we have to take stock of what we do. What we promised we would be doing is publish a strategy for 2025 this year. But we've also been asked recently to publish our new 2050 strategy earlier than we thought. And because we want to kind of capitalize on the fact that Poland will chair the COP discussions in Katowice, we've decided to publish that 2050 strategy before Katowice earlier this year. So now we have 2 strategies that we promised that we would deliver this year. The 2025 one and an updated 2050 one. And so my colleagues back in Brussels are strategizing as how best to package these 2 things and get the support of nearly all member states to increase ambition. But we don't know. We need to assess what's possible, and it's still early days. But if all goes well, we can move. That would be our wish. But we need to carry the 28 member states with us, and it's not always easy.
Last question.
Hi, I'm Penny Wetton. I'm an honorary fellow here at the college at Melbourne University. I'm also doing some work with the Victorian government on setting targets for Victoria. It's always interesting to hear of coal-fired power stations closing while still young. You mentioned the ones in Holland. I mean, I think it's plausible in Australia that we'll see early closure of coal just through the sheer economics and not through any new policy necessarily. Is that the case in Europe or in Germany in particular? Could you see early closure of coal just by the economics without any particular policy intervention to bring it about?
Well, the emissions trading price would have to reach a higher level. But I guess again in the combination, but that's another policy in terms of air pollution standards that can push this. I think in the case of Germany, without such a policy, we certainly wouldn't see this in the time frame that we would, see consistent with the Paris Agreement. Yeah, and certainly in the case of the Netherlands, that is really a decision. I think that would certainly not happen without that political decision. Yeah.
Thank you. And please join me in thanking not only Ursula, but also Caroline Lambert and the EU for the EU Climate Diplomacy Week that is on this week. Thank you. So thank you, Ursula, for the... You will also have a chance to see Ursula tonight if you booked for one of our places of the screening of The Guardians of the Earth. If you did, make sure that you go either to Cinema Nova or here, depending on what your ticket says, because this is the overflow room. We had too many tickets for tonight in Cinema Nova, so make sure that you go to the right place, but both will have the full screening and the transmission of the panel discussion, also with Ursula and the Austrian ambassador, also part of the EU Climate Diplomacy Week. On the Friday, the 22nd of June, you will also have again the advantage of being able to listen to the EU. The Caroline Lambert presents a talk on the circular economy discussions within the EU. And then later on, which you see also in our seminars program on the Climate College website, we have Alexei Trundle, one of ours, looking at urban resilience in Pacific small island states. So thank you very much for joining us today and looking forward to see you again soon. Thank you.